file of clippings from the Calgary Public Library, and to say the least, they were most confusing. There were hair-raising stories about the number of persons who had been found murdered with their heads missing. Then the very next clipping might claim that the Headless Valley didn't exist at all. News item after news item told of victims who had never returned from that land of mystery. Most reporters didn't actually know where the Headless Valley was located, but they all agreed that it was a place that people entered, then disappeared for various most mysterious reasons. Actually, there are now about 30-some persons who are known to have lost their lives in the valley. Most of the deaths can be accounted for by murders, attacks by grizzly bears, drownings, or starvation, without having to blame some mysterious disease, as some of the reporters have done. Most newspaper articles claim that the Headless Valley is in northern British Columbia, but actually it is in the valley of the South Nahanni River, well up in Canada's Northwest Territories, within about 300 miles of the Arctic Circle. About 1,100 miles north of the U.S. border along the Alaska Highway is Old Fort Nelson, the usual jumping-off point by canoe for the Headless Valley. From the old fort there on the Fort Nelson River, one goes down to where it joins the Liard River, then on down the Liard to the mouth of the South Nahanni River. And finally, to get up into the actual Headless Valley, one has to fight up through the canyons and rapids of the South Nahanni River.
Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree, and I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Deep in Bigfoot territory. Episode 15, The Nahanni River and the Valley of the Headless Men. This is a Squatch Mafia documentary. Welcome to this episode of Bigfoot territory. Today we are going to visit one of the classic and most notorious places of Bigfoot lore in the Canadian North. The Nahanni River Valley, home to countless ancient legends and eerie tales, is the site of many Bigfoot encounters and stories since the early 20th century. The valley is huge, with over 11,600 square miles along the Mackenzie Mountain Range and centered around the South Nahanni River. The valley is extremely remote, 300 miles or 500 kilometers from the nearest city of Yellowknife, which is also the only city in the Northwest Territories. The only way to get inside the Nahanni River Valley is via a plane, multi-day boat trip, or a long overland journey from the abandoned village of Tungsten. The valley is situated above the 60th parallel north, which puts it in line with the rest of Canada's wild territories. In 1972, the Nahanni National Park was founded and has been proclaimed an UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978, along with Yellowstone National Park. To emphasize the remoteness of the Nahanni National Park, the park receives 800 to 1,000 visitors per year, while Yellowstone averages over 4 million visitors per year. While the park is centered around the South Nahanni River, Virginia Falls and Glacier Lake are other highlights of the spectacular landscape. The Nahanni River Valley is an 11,600 square mile strip of mountains, forests, geysers, and grizzlies. The Nahanni River itself has a total length of approximately 350 miles or 563 kilometers, and originates in the Mackenzie Mountains before flowing through deep canyons and valleys and eventually into the Liard River. After washing through 11-story high canyons, the river plunges into a waterfall that is twice as high as Niagara Falls. The region is home to many diverse animal species, many of which are predatorial. Large grizzly bears and timber wolves are the chief carnivores here, and people are seldom seen in this landscape. Historically, The lands around the Nahanni Valley were home to the people of the Dean tribes who dwelt here for many centuries. But it seems that they never lived exactly along the Nahanni River and its tributaries, from which the Nahanni Valley gets its name. The Dean inhabited the lowlands along the Mackenzie River and traditionally avoided the South Nahanni River Valley due to frequent raids by the Naha tribe, who are said to have lived in the mountainous areas above the valley. The Dean also stayed out of the valley because they believed it to be cursed and feared the large prehistoric animals and huge hairy men believed to live in the wooded canyons. The oral histories of the Dean, passed down through generations, describe the Naha as a warlike tribe, living in the high mountains and descending into the lowlands to raid and kill. They became the main foes of the Dean peoples and were greatly feared by them. The name Nahanni itself is of Dean origin and means the river of the Naha people. These oral histories and the name itself are very important, as they are etymological certain proof that a different tribe once dwelt here. However, the Deans state that the Naha people simply vanished at one time, ceasing their raids and disappearing altogether. Mystery surrounds these so-called Naha, but no trace of them has ever been found. So far, they are only found in stories. The Nahanni region became the focus of many mystery hunters, and most of this focus was on a special place within the valley, one called the 200-Mile Gorge. The Dean natives speak of an unknown evil dwelling there, and few ever enter it, especially because of the events that transpired there. For it's the 200-Mile Gorge that gained the notorious name of the Valley of the Headless Men. The origins of this eerie nickname can be traced to the early 20th century, at the time of the famous Klondike Gold Rush. At the time of the Klondike Gold Rush, beginning in the mid-1890s, many would-be prospectors wanted to test their fortunes and head out to the remote Canadian wilderness, especially Yukon. Two of these prospectors decided to forego the traditional routes and locations leading to Yukon, and to instead try their luck in the Nahanni Valley. They were two brothers of Métis and Scottish ancestry, Willie and Frank McLeod. During the Klondike Gold Rush, the two brothers set out in the early 1900s to pursue their dreams of gold and wealth. They chose the remote South Nahanni River Valley, which was considered a shortcut to the arduous overland route from Edmonton and nearby goldfields. Previous Western explorers who had passed through the area reported a tropical valley that was free of snow due to local thermal springs. There were also stories of hunters and fur trappers returning with large prehistoric bones, tusks, and pelts of mammals long extinct. In 1906, the two McLeod brothers canoed upriver to reach the Nahanni Valley, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. In 1908, 2 years later, a search party discovered their skeletons at the remains of a camp. Both were headless. Seemingly, they were asleep when they were attacked. The body of one of the brothers lay reaching out towards a gun, indicating a need for defense. A third man, their companion surnamed Weir, was missing. Theories floated about until another corpse was discovered in 1917. It was that of a Swiss prospector named Martin Jorgensen. His body was discovered next to the remains of his cabin. The cabin was burned to the ground. Jorgensen's head was missing. In 1927, another body was discovered in the Nahanni River Valley, belonging to a man nicknamed Yukon Fisher. Variously dubbed an outlaw and a prospector, this man was sought by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for several years before his death. The officials found his skeleton on the banks of Bennett Creek, quite close to the place where the bodies of the McLeod brothers were found in 1908. His death was never fully explained. In 1928, one prospector named Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never again seen. Then, in 1931, another body was found. This time, it was that of a man named Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in the ashes of what was his cabin. Another pair of prospectors, Joe Mulholland and Bill Epier, disappeared in 1936. For many years they were searched for, but never found. Another story is that of a woman named Annie Laferte, who also went missing in the Headless Valley. In 1926, she went missing while being with a hunting party near Flat River, as she disappeared in the wilderness. Many months later, an Indian by the name of Big Charlie claimed to have seen the woman climbing a hill while totally naked, seemingly having lost her mind. Many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the Valley of the Headless Men. So inhospitable was the Nahanni Valley that even in the 1930s it was still unexplored. In 1940, the remains of a man named Holmberg were found in the wilderness of the Headless Valley. In 1945, a miner from Ontario, whose name is now lost, was found dead, still in his sleeping bag. His head, however, was never found. Around that time, another trapper disappeared in the inhospitable wilderness. His name was John O'Brien, and he was found dead next to his campfire. In 1949, a man named Shabach was found dead in front of his remote cabin. By 1969, there were up to 44 recorded disappearances in the Nahanni Valley. The national park was founded in 1972. It has been proclaimed an UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. The mysterious series of disappearances and murders of people in the Valley of the Headless Men at the Nahanni River continues to this day. One of the most recent cases involves two outdoorsmen from Fort Simpson who died under unknown circumstances in the wilderness. In summer of 2005, the two experienced bushmen David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty disappeared from a remote hunting camp near the Headless Valley. Rod Gunderson, a friend of the two men, had last seen them alive on June 12th. When he returned to the hunting camp on June 16th, he found it abandoned. On June 18th, the police joined the search for the two missing men. On June 27th, the body of David Horsey was found in the dense wilderness near the camp, about 3.7 kilometers away. On July 8th, the body of Frederick Hardesty was found floating in the river, about 20 kilometers from the camp. Although the Royal Canadian Mounted Police conducted an investigation, the case was never solved. The family members of Horsey and Hardesty were dissatisfied with the way the police handled the case and filed complaints. It was argued that the police did not do enough to solve the case and that there are still many unanswered questions. A newspaper article from 2018 about the 2005 case says the following: David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty, two men from Fort Simpson in the Northwest Territories, were found dead in 2005. The cause of death for both men remains unclear, which has raised many questions for their families. In recent years, the families have repeatedly contacted authorities to demand a new investigation into the case. The two men went to a friend's cabin, 125 kilometers northwest of Fort Simpson, in June 2005. Horsey's body was later found in the thick bush almost 4 kilometers away from the cabin, while Hardesty's body was found in the Nahanni River, about 20 kilometers away from the cabin. The men had been missing for almost a month before their bodies were found. It was officially determined that Horsey died of hypothermia and Hardesty drowned. The stepbrother of Horsey was part of the search party for the two men, and he said they found strange things at the cabin. There were bullet shots all over the place, said the stepbrother. The picture is bigger than just two guys, one who died of hypothermia and the other who died of drowning, he said. There was something else that happened before all that came down. He said that when the search began, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police didn't cordon off the cabin because there was nothing to indicate foul play. He said the search party and the police were camped out near the site during the search. After the bodies were found, Horsey's stepbrother said he asked the police again if they would be investigating. He said the Royal Canadian Mounted Police stated they would not be, because all the evidence had been contaminated by the search party. The families are not satisfied with the investigation. How could two men in one weekend both die, one in the river and one in the bush? It's very unsettling. There's no closure, said Horsey's sister. Both Hardesty and Horsey were described as experienced bushmen. The families filed a complaint back in 2005 to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police about the way the case was handled. Also, the Lidley First Nation is calling for a public inquiry into the disappearance and deaths. The Dean people, who have historically lived in the area near the Nahanni Valley for hundreds, if not thousands of years, have a variety of stories and legends in which the Nahanni, one of the many Sasquatch-like figures in native North American mythology, plays an important role. The Dean, who are part of the Athabascan people, primarily live in the Northwest Territories and parts of British Columbia, Alberta, and Manitoba. Their territory spans over an area of more than 700,000 square kilometers and includes a variety of landscapes, including tundra, forests, and mountain regions. They traditionally lived off fishing, hunting and gathering, and developed a close relationship with the animals and plants in their environment. They also have a rich oral tradition that includes stories and songs that preserve the traditions and customs of their people since many centuries. The Nahanni, which is described as a humanoid being that lives in the forests and mountains, is depicted as a sort of guardian of the forests in some Dean stories. But in the most stories, the creature is described as dangerous, aggressive, and unpredictable, and it is strongly recommended to stay out of its territory. Nahanni and Sasquatch are of course two different names for the same figure that appears in the folklore of indigenous peoples of North America. Both terms are used to describe a large, humanoid being that lives in remote and inaccessible areas of the wilderness. The forests and mountains of the Nahanni River Valley are said to be the habitat of the Nahanni as long as can be remembered. There are also similarities in the descriptions of the appearance and behavior of Nahanni and Sasquatch. Both are often described as large, strong, and hairy, with long arms and large feet. They are said to be able to move quickly and skillfully through the forest and exhibit human-like movements and behavior. In Dean mythology, there are also reports of giant cannibalistic tribes that are considered dangerous and ominous figures. These stories date back to a time when the Deans still lived as hunters and gatherers, and are often associated with the Naha tribe. In some traditions, it is reported that these were tribes of wild giant people who hunted, killed, and ate other humans. These tribes were often considered ominous and evil, and in many stories, they were practicing witchcraft and black magic. The Métis, another indigenous population group in Canada living in the region, also have stories and legends about the Sasquatch, or the Wetiko, a large, hairy wild man. In Métis culture, the Wetiko is considered an evil spirit, often depicted as a giant with supernatural powers. It is said that he kidnaps and kills people, especially women, to gain his supernatural strength and power. There are also reports of Métis encountering these Sasquatch-like beings in the Nahanni region. However, these stories are also not positive and describe the Sasquatch as aggressive and hostile. The historical reports and sightings of these large prehistoric mammals and hominid Gigantopithecus-sized creatures roaming the remote wilderness of northern Canada seem in many ways plausible. The South Nahanni River Valley would have been located on the original migration routes for species that crossed the land bridge at the Bering Strait. The valley and its extremely isolated location could have allowed these prehistoric species to persist long after their extinction in other more heavily populated areas. There are various reasons why it would make sense for a creature like the Sasquatch to live in the Nahanni region. At first, it's a remote location. The Nahanni River Valley is very remote and difficult to access, making it an ideal habitat for an elusive species that want to hide from human activity. There are few roads and settlements near the valley, which could make it a natural refuge. Also, the region is filled with potential food sources. It is an extensive wilderness area with abundant natural resources such as water, wildlife, and shelter. The Sasquatch could find enough food and shelter here to survive. There are many other wild animals in the valley that the Sasquatch could use as food sources, including moose, caribou, deer, and fish. So this could very well be an optimal habitat for a supposed cryptid species like the Sasquatch. As said before, the reports of missing persons and documented Bigfoot sightings in the Nahanni River Valley continue to this day, with cases of missing or deceased persons coming from 2005, 2012, and 2019. Several Bigfoot sightings have been documented in the valley, from 1990 to 2023. So, the Nahanni River Valley seems to stay one of the most mysterious and dangerous places of the subarctic North American continent. What is your opinion on the stories from the Nahanni River and the Valley of the Headless Men? Let me know in the comments. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this episode of Bigfoot Territory. Subscribe to the Squatch Mafia channel at YouTube for more videos on Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Check out Squatch Mafia at Patreon and TikTok for extra content. Thank you for watching.